The story commences with an introduction to our central character, Presidio Cage, a hero who desperately yearns to return home. It has been quite some time since he was summoned into the fantastical realm of magic and swords by a ethereal goddess. In this alternate world, he is compelled to vanquish the Demon King, not only to safeguard the world but also to secure his return to his home world. Throughout his journey, he forges bonds with companions and engages in numerous life-threatening battles where their lives hang in the balance. He encounters genuine friendship, experiences love, and bids sorrowful farewells. Despite these profound connections, in the end, he stands alone, bearing the weight of the sacrifices made by his dear companions. Confronting the Demon King with his legendary sword, he believes the end is near. However, after defeating the Demon King and anticipating his return home, he closes his eyes, only to be met with a shocking and terrifying revelation upon reopening them. Contrary to his expectations, he hasn't been transported back to his own world. Instead, he finds himself regressed to the very beginning, to the point of his initial summoning by the goddess. This unexpected turn of events leaves him with a "what the fuck" expression. Despite making countless attempts to slay the Demon King, he gradually comprehends that he is trapped in this singular world, unable to escape, even after repeatedly defeating the Demon King, only to be regressed to the same starting point. In the current moment, within the Demon King's castle, Cage is seated atop the apparently feeble-looking Demon King, reflecting on his life choices. Uncertain of his next move, he turns to the Demon King, inquiring about any possible actions to facilitate his return home. In response, the still fearful Demon King pleads with Cage to simply go away. Upon hearing this, Cage acknowledges his folly in posing such a question and descends into a contemplative state, pondering the unexplored paths in his quest. He has attempted every conceivable strategy, from confronting the Demon King solo without allies or weapons, to capturing and delivering him to the king. Cage even once allowed the Demon King to wreak havoc and dominate the world, and even indulged in a quick speedrun to kill the Demon King, with his best record at 23 hours, 11 minutes, and 13 seconds. Despite the enjoyment of setting speedrun records, he remains stuck in the past rather than returning to his homeworld. With the Demon King still cowering on the floor, Cage roams the castle, wearing a visibly distressed expression, considering any potential methods he might not have tried yet. During Cage's musings, the Demon King, humiliated by the situation, views it as the opportune moment to strike, sensing Cage's guard is down. However, Cage's annoyance results in a powerful punch through the Demon King's castle, creating a sizable hole in the middle. Witnessing this, the Demon King is greatly shocked and immediately ceases his advances. However, Cage notices the movement and questions the Demon King's actions, prompting a fearful smile from the Demon King, who explains that he was merely doing push-ups. In response, Cage fixes him with a deadly gaze, demanding an explanation for his unauthorized movement, sending shivers down the Demon King's spine. Cage then proceeds to the Demon King's throne, contemplating his next move. The Demon King, seizing an opportunity, suggests that, since Cage was summoned into the world through the god's magic, he should kill them all. However, Cage, displaying an indifferent expression that implies the Demon King might have proposed this idea before during his countless regressions, dismisses it, stating that falling for such petty tricks leads to the inevitable outcome of regression. The Demon King sighs in disbelief, realizing Cage may have attempted this approach as well, and falls silent. Cage, observing the silence, informs the Demon King that for every second he withholds an idea, he'll receive a severe slap. Upon hearing Cage's threat, the Demon King, now on his knees, grapples with a dilemma. As he contemplates a solution, the realization dawns on him that Cage, true to his claim, has killed him multiple times, only to be regressed to the past each instance. This prompts the Demon King to consider the prospect of another hero challenging him, but he swiftly dismisses the idea, confident that he would not succumb to any other hero. While the Demon King continues to voice his thoughts, Cage's face lights up with joy as he recognizes an unexplored possibility. He realizes that he has never attempted to summon and train another hero to vanquish the Demon King. Expressing his gratitude to the Demon King for unintentionally providing this revelation, Cage's elation causes the Demon King to flinch. However, the apparent happiness is short-lived as Cage interrupts the moment, politely requesting the Demon King's cooperation and swiftly ending his own life. Upon hearing this request, the Demon King's expression changes as he locks eyes with Cage's menacing gaze. Before he can even plead for his life, Cage acts swiftly, ending the Demon King's existence with tears in his eyes. Immediately after dispatching the Demon King, Cage found himself transported to a mysterious white space, and despite experiencing this phenomenon several times, he couldn't quite get used to the disconcerting feeling. Within seconds, Cage reappeared in front of the ethereal goddess named Freedia, who greeted him with the usual line. Realizing that he had once again been regressed to the past, Cage swiftly approached Freedia, calling her name and inquiring if she could create superior mana crystals. Freedia affirmed her ability, but her composed expression shifted to surprise when Cage casually addressed her by name. Startled, she asked how he knew her name. Cage, finding the explanation bothersome, urged her to hand over the mana crystals. Freedia, however, insisted on explaining the workings of the world and the correct path to defeat the Demon King. Unwilling to comply, Cage leaned in and whispered one of her nasty, dirty secrets, causing Freedia to recoil, astonished by how he knew. Cage, seemingly indifferent, prompted her to hand over the crystals, and eventually she conceded. In embarrassment, Freedia left, and Cage stood before a large superior-grade mana crystal, preparing to summon another hero. As Cage initiated the summoning ritual, he acknowledged that it should be impossible for him to summon a hero without mana. However, armed with extensive knowledge, Cage bypassed the need for mana. He unsheathed his sleeve, revealing runes inscribed around his arm, and channeled his energy into the ground. In an instant, the surroundings were bathed in light, and in a poof, a young-looking teen with short black hair named Shin Yubi appeared, bewildered by his sudden arrival. Trying to piece together his memories, Shin recalled being hit by Truck Kuan before finding himself in this unfamiliar place. As he attempted to make sense of the situation, he noticed Cage, who was looking at him with an evil grin. Shin quickly inquired about Cage's identity. With an evil grin, Cage delivered the typical Ice Sky Goddess introduction, concluding by explaining that Shin, after defeating the Demon King, would be sent back home. Expecting a positive response, Cage was instead met with a seemingly indifferent gaze from Shin, who questioned Cage about what gives him the right to speak to him so informally despite just meeting him. This response, coupled with Shin's tone and demeanor, prompted Cage to stare at him with a bewildered expression. Observing the situation, Cage endeavored to engage Shin in a rational conversation, presenting a more serene and explanatory approach. However, despite Cage's attempt to convey the information in a peaceful manner, Shin remained steadfast in his decision, asserting his lack of interest in confronting the Demon Lord. In response, Cage, growing increasingly frustrated, questioned Shin about his reluctance, asking if he truly desired to return home. Shin affirmed his desire to go home but expressed distrust in Cage, contending that summoning should involve a beautiful and formidable goddess, not a hairy, sweaty man. This rationale left Cage grimacing in frustration as he pondered the nature of the individual he had summoned. Meanwhile, in the Demon King's castle, the menacing Demon King sat on his throne, extending a chilling welcome to the hero Cage. Without exchanging words, Cage leaped into action, delivering a fierce blow and urging the Demon King to just succumb to defeat. Eager to start anew and summon a different hero, Cage prepared the resources and infused more energy into the magic circle. To his astonishment, Shin emerged once again, leaving Cage bewildered as to why Shin was summoned once more. Disregarding any explanation for Shin, Cage proceeded to the Demon King's castle, where he swiftly dispatched the Demon King once more. However, despite his efforts to summon a different hero, Shin continued to reappear, prompting Cage to express frustration and anger. This cycle repeated itself as Cage relentlessly killed the Demon King and attempted to summon another hero, only to have Shin persistently emerge each time. After his 100th attempt, Cage finally conceded defeat. Determined to alter the circumstances, he resorted to blackmailing the goddess Freedia, coercing her into posing as the one responsible for the summoning. Subsequently, Cage summoned another hero, only to find Shin once again. However, this time around, he allowed Freedia to explain things to Shin, and surprisingly, Shin appeared cooperative alongside Freedia, much to Cage's relief. Freedia provided Shin with a brief overview of the situation, and to Cage's dismay, Shin expressed a willingness to aid in defeating the Demon Lord, leaving Cage furious. Freedia then introduced Cage to Shin as her assistant, tasked with guiding him, and as Cage locked eyes with Shin, he couldn't ignore the profound sense of animosity emanating from Shin towards him. After briefing Shin, Freedia discreetly approached Cage, whispering in his ear about her disbelief that a hero had been summoned by another hero. She questioned how she was supposed to explain this situation to the other gods and goddesses, and in response, Cage reassured her, urging her to leave and assuring her not to worry. However, before leaving, she reminded Cage to keep his promise, to which he affirmed. Now alone with Shin, Cage confronted him, promising to make him strong enough to defeat the Demon King, and in response, Shin, with a seemingly crude expression, questioned why Cage was speaking to him in an informal manner. Despite his fury at Shin's attitude, Cage decided to endure it, driven by the desire to finally return to his homeworld. Shortly afterward, they encountered the king, a self-proclaimed supporter of hero Shin. Cage, upon hearing the king's promises, couldn't help but sigh in disbelief, realizing that the monarch's support was merely a facade. Throughout countless regressions, the king had consistently pledged assistance but never delivered, leaving Cage to bear the hero's burdens alone. Following the brief interaction with the king, Shin and Cage proceeded to the city. As they navigated through the urban landscape, Cage took it upon himself to provide Shin with essential information that a novice hero should know, guiding Shin on how to access his status window and providing basic information about it. As Shin examined his status tab, he discovered his occupation was labeled as novice. Questioning this, Shin learned from Cage that he had yet to choose a main power-boosting occupation, a crucial thing needed to confront and defeat the Demon King effectively. Amused by the prospect, Cage, wearing an evil grin, suggested numerous overpowered occupations for Shin. However, Shin remained seemingly indifferent, expressing that he doesn't like being told what to do, and rejecting Cage's suggestions. Initially annoyed, Cage composed himself, granting Shin the freedom to explore the city independently and select a suitable occupation, hoping he wouldn't choose a useless one. As Shin ventured off, Cage waited, indifferent to the chosen occupation since, as a seasoned regressor, he possessed the means to rapidly empower any chosen occupation. Yet, amidst his contemplation, Cage recalled the dreaded freelancer occupation, the bane of his existence that had prolonged his battle with the Demon King for over 2 decades. Despite thinking it highly unlikely, much to Cage's astonishment, when Shin arrived to reveal his occupation, it was none other than the accursed freelancer occupation, leaving Cage dumbfounded. Meanwhile, at the Demon King's castle, the Demon King sat on his throne with a serious and sorrowful expression, haunted by recurring nightmares of the hero repeatedly killing him. Just as he pondered these unsettling thoughts, his contemplation was suddenly interrupted by a massive explosion, sparking fear in his heart. From within the explosion emerged Cage, hurtling toward the Demon King with extraordinary speed, setting a new record of 23 hours, 9 minutes, and 40 seconds. "I have done everything I could," Cage muttered as he attempted, for the 200th time, to summon a hero. In this seemingly endless cycle, the same hero named Shin emerged, persistently selecting the seemingly useless freelancer occupation. Cage's frustration grew with each repetition, despite his attempts at begging and even issuing threats to coerce Shin into choosing a different path. Eventually, Cage conceded, abandoning his futile efforts to sway Shin's occupational preference. Returning to the present, Cage and Shin found themselves perched somewhere in the city at sunset. With a solemn expression, Cage broached the topic, asking Shin why he was determined to defeat the Demon Lord. Shin's response was simple: he sought to return home. Frustrated by Shin's answer, Cage questioned why he consistently chose the freelance occupation. Shin explained his belief that the freelance occupation offered the ability to learn all the skills in the world, making it technically overpowered. Hearing this, Cage sighed in disbelief, recounting that he once held a similar belief. Intrigued, Shin questioned Cage's statement, prompting Cage to deflect the inquiry and focus on dispelling Shin's misconception. Cage clarified that while the freelance occupation allowed one to acquire any skill, the drawback was that the individual remained perpetually at level 1, and any weapons or skills acquired would be capped at that level. Even supreme-grade weapons would be reduced to low-grade status if the player didn't meet the stat requirements. Furthermore, buffs from teammates wouldn't affect the freelancer, making it the worst occupation. After outlining the myriad downsides, Cage delicately broached the subject of changing occupations. Intrigued, Shin's expression hinted at contemplation. Encouraged, Cage eagerly inquired further, only to be met with a defiant expression from Shin, who firmly stated that he wouldn't change his occupation under any circumstances. Upon hearing this, Cage could only contain his frustration, while Shin, on the other hand, expressed his fondness for the freelance occupation. It was Shin's first time choosing something for himself, and he appreciated the freedom it offered. Despite the potential drawbacks, Shin valued the ability to learn any skill he desired, even if it meant foregoing the traditional leveling up process. In response, Cage tried to advise Shin to reconsider, emphasizing that opting for the freelance occupation meant sacrificing the protective benefits of the goddess's system. Given Shin's intention to challenge the powerful Demon King, Cage warned that defeat was nearly inevitable without the system's support. However, Shin, with a determined expression, asserted that he cared little about the losses associated with freelancing, as he was confident in using it to defeat the Demon Lord. Seeing Shin's resolute demeanor, Cage smiled, recognizing the futility of convincing him otherwise. As a seasoned professional, Cage decided to guide Shin to the best of his abilities. The scene transitions to a forest where we see a goblin roaming around. On the opposite side of the goblin's location, Cage and Shin hide among branches, keeping a close eye on the creature. Cage informs Shin that goblins rank as the weakest among aggressive monsters. Despite the discouraging news, Cage hands Shin a low-grade sword, offering words of encouragement before urging him to confront the goblin directly in front of them. Upon hearing this, Shin is initially stunned, but he recognizes that defeating the goblin is a necessary step for him. With determination, he stands up to face the goblin, believing it should be relatively easy given his past experience in security classes from his previous life. Cage, surprised by this revelation, wonders about the kind of life Shin led to have taken security classes. Setting aside his curiosity, Cage contemplates whether Shin's previous security classes have equipped him with enough fighting experience to defeat the goblin. However, despite the increased confidence in Shin's abilities, much to Cage's disappointment, Shin is easily defeated shortly after, leaving Cage with a bewildered expression. In the late hours at an inn, Shin remains unconscious in his room, while Cage, frustrated, sits in the lounge, contemplating the challenge of training a hero with an FFF class occupation. As he reflects on this dilemma, Cage engages in banter with the inn staff, sipping from a large cup of wine. Amidst the conversation, an idea strikes him. Quickly expressing gratitude to the lounge staff, he rushes to the Demon King's castle, effortlessly dispatches the Demon King, summons Shin once more, allows him to freely choose the same seemingly useless occupation, and this time, instead of complaining, Cage deceives Shin into believing he selected an absolute cheat and overpowered occupation. Cage explains that it's an occupation enabling Shin to self-learn anything, and if he trains in a particular craft until he feels thirsty and hungry, his strength will double the next day. Hearing this, Shin takes note and begins training in swordsmanship. Cage grins with excitement, having finally found a way to overcome Shin's stubbornness. After a training session and realizing his thirst, Shin is about to get a drink when Cage interrupts, presenting a mysterious drink with a seemingly harmless smile. Similarly, when Shin is hungry, Cage provides food, concealing a mysterious liquid behind his back, smiling as Shin devours the meal. Later that day, unlike Shin's initial attempt, he successfully defeats the goblin, much to the excitement of both Cage and Shin. Later that night, while Shin sleeps, Cage sneaks into his room. With a seemingly benign smile, he pours the same mysterious liquid into Shin's mouth, which turns out to be a potion of Cage's liquid. Yes, I mean his sperm. The following day, Shin demonstrates improved prowess by effortlessly dispatching a group of goblins, much to Cage's satisfaction. After their training session, during which Shin defeated a few goblins, he felt fatigued and thirsty. Seizing the opportunity, Cage, wearing a seemingly harmless smile, quickly presented him with a cup filled with his liquid, unbeknownst to Shin. Oblivious, Shin gulped it down, only to squirt out a mouthful of Cage's liquid moments later, complaining about stomach pain and wondering if it resulted from his earlier battle with the goblins. Cage, unsurprised by Shin's reaction and aware of the side effects of his liquid, reassured Shin not to worry too much, assuring him that the stomach pain would subside soon. Internally, Cage began reconsidering his decision to dope Shin with his liquid, realizing it might not be advantageous anymore, as Shin could die of constipation before their journey to the Demon King's castle even began. Amidst Cage's contemplation, a young girl approached them and expressed gratitude for defeating the goblins that had troubled her village. Cage responded by urging the girl to prepare their reward. However, upon noticing Shin in pain on the floor, the young girl redirected her concern, inquiring about Shin's well-being. Before Cage could respond, she rushed to Shin, reassuring him and gathering mana in her hands to offer treatment. Cage, momentarily shocked by the girl's abilities, quickly recalled that she would become the kingdom's healer in 10 years. However, despite her efforts, he sighed in disbelief, realizing that her attempts were futile in healing Shin due to his imprudent choice of the freelance occupation. Resigned to the situation, Cage sighed again, contemplating that he might have to choose a specific occupation for himself to further strengthen Shin. The following day, Shin lies on the bed in the room, visibly improved from the previous day. Within the confines of the room, the young girl diligently tends to Shin's well-being, while Cage appears to observe their interaction from another corner of the room. As the young girl and Shin engage in conversation, Cage beckons the girl over, inquiring about the promised reward, and in response she promptly hands them a small pouch filled with gold coins. Cage pours the coins into his hands, wearing an expression of seeming indifference as he examines the amount. He points out to the girl that the sum falls short of the promised reward, and in response, the girl calmly explains that she deducted a few coins as compensation for treating Shin. Cage is taken aback by this revelation, but before their conversation can delve deeper, Shin interjects, labeling the girl's actions as unnecessary and stating that she doesn't need to provide any reward. The girl, appreciative of Shin's sentiment, happily thanks the hero before swiftly retrieving the pouch from Cage's hand. Observing this, Cage appears visibly fed up and proceeds to confront Shin. In response, Shin asserts that he is the one who earned the money through his efforts and so he has the right to decide how it is spent. The young girl, seemingly thrilled to reclaim her money, agrees with Shin's perspective, urging Cage to accept his role as an incompetent assistant. These words leave Cage standing on the sidelines, seething with fury at being labeled incompetent by a small girl. Later that day, within the bustling streets of the city, Cage hands Shin a pouch of money, urging him to take care of himself for the next few days and find a comrade to aid him in the impending journey against the Demon King. Cage emphasizes that this is a task Shin must undertake alone as the hero, giving him a week to secure a competent companion. As Cage and Shin gradually walk separate paths, Cage glances back at Shin, expressing a lack of concern about who Shin selects. His primary motive for assigning the one-week task is to afford himself enough time to acquire the occupation crucial for supporting the freelance occupation, the legendary occupation, notoriously more time-consuming to obtain than even defeating the Demon King. The scene transitions as we witness Cage navigating an icy mountain, ascending toward its summit. During his journey, an elderly man interrupts Cage, cautioning him about the extreme danger ahead. Despite the warning, Cage dismisses the concern, leaving the old man with a pitying expression, convinced that Cage is unlikely to survive. Upon reaching his intended destination, Cage confronts a formidable legendary creature known as a pyro dragon. Facing this dragon as a low-level player like Shin, Cage acknowledges the apparent peril but remains confident, drawing upon extensive experience gained from defeating the dragon in his previous lives. With this assurance, Cage charges at the dragon. Recognizing the dragon's imminent fiery breath attack, Cage quickly seeks refuge behind a large rock, shielding himself from the flames. His strategically chosen attire, including warm merchant clothes and the prior application of a fire resistance potion, alleviate concerns about the dragon's scorching breath. Cage unveils an artisan-carved stone armed with an intermediate-level throwing glove. Taking aim, he hurls the stone at a specific point on the mountain, creating a small crack. The dragon's movements exacerbate the cracks, triggering a massive piece of the mountain to collapse, and the resulting landslide engulfs the dragon, sending it crashing down to its inevitable demise. Following the dragon's demise, Cage receives a flurry of level-up notifications, but he remains indifferent as he anticipates another event. As expected, a peculiar-looking old man materializes before him, extending congratulations on passing a test and inquiring about what Cage desires him to create. However, before Cage could respond, the old man's high socket pops out in shock when he wonders how Cage, with seemingly meager attire, single-handedly defeated his adorable dragon. Despite the old man's astonishment, Cage calmly states his simple wish for a handshake. Amused by Cage's request, the old man giggles, finding the young lad intriguing. Complying with Cage's wish, he offers a warm, no-homo handshake before dissipating into nothingness. In the aftermath, Cage experiences physical growth as he attains the legendary occupation he sought, the legendary creator occupation, the only role he believes can bolster the frail freelance occupation. A week later, back in town and now at level 122, Cage heads to the agreed-upon meeting point with Shin. His status window reveals 2 new skills acquired from his occupation, Manufacturing Golem and Destruction Golem. While awaiting Shin's arrival in the city center, Cage ponders the nature of the companion Shin might bring. However, when Shin appears with the companion by his side, Cage is visibly shocked, recognizing the identity of the newcomer. This individual revealed herself as Tia, a woman who had once been one of Cage's comrades during his initial journey, predating his first regression. As Tia, an archmage, approached Cage and introduced herself, he stood there, reminiscing that Tia wasn't just his first comrade but also his initial love, sharing a destined connection that ended tragically with her premature death at a young age. Observing Tia now, Cage couldn't help but wonder if history would repeat itself, subjecting her to a similar tragic fate. However, he chose to set aside those thoughts, realizing that this time he had taken a different path by summoning Shin, altering the course of Tia's destiny. Confronting both of them, Cage inquired about their meeting, and Shin explained that they had encountered each other in a forest, both lost and hungry. Shin shared his remaining bread with Tia, and they decided to become companions, navigating their way out of the forest together. Listening to their story left Cage perplexed, and when Shin asked if everything was all right, Cage responded with a menacing smile, signaling Shin to prepare for combat, and at that moment, a colossal monster descended, wreaking havoc on the city. Observing the destruction caused by the monster, Cage stood there with an indifferent expression. Although he knew Shin stood little chance against the monster, it was a necessary development for Shin, the hero, to meet the kingdom's commander. Moreover, Cage wasn't concerned about Shin's safety since Tai, an archmage destined to become the world's strongest, was there with him. Amidst the destruction, Tai attempted to cast a fire spell at the monster, but it was unexpectedly weak, shocking Cage. The monster continued its rampage, blowing Tai away and compelling Cage to intervene. Saving Tai, Cage noticed the absence of the commander destined to save the day and decided to encourage Shin before their arrival. Confronting Shin, Cage urged him to believe in himself, and this encouragement proved to be the catalyst Shin needed as he took his first step toward the monster, delivering a powerful vertical slash that severed one of its arms. Shin was amazed by his newfound strength, unaware that it was facilitated by the cheat items Cage had created using his legendary occupation creator. Amidst the turmoil, Cage stood with magnificent composure, a smile adorning his face, while the golem of creation loomed behind him. Meanwhile, Shin remained in a state of shock, grappling with the newfound raw power he had unexpectedly unleashed. Delighted with the success of his first occupation, Cage beamed with joy but couldn't help sighing sadly at the inability to mass-produce those overpowered items just yet. Nevertheless, he held on to the belief that such a feat would become achievable in the future. At that moment, the seemingly defeated monster rose to its feet, much to Shin's surprise. Recognizing that Shin stood no chance against the revived foe, Cage promptly urged him to retreat. However, Shin, fueled by anger, defiantly rejected the suggestion, declaring his refusal to run away. Cage, witnessing Shin's determination, grimaced in frustration at his stubbornness. Shin then assumed a fighting stance, ready to confront the monster once more, while Cage, observing the scene, sighed in disbelief. Despite Cage's ability to create overpowered cheat items, Shin remained a level 1 newcomer, and as a result, it became evident that as a novice, Shin couldn't defeat the monster on his own. Cage reflected on his own past as a hero, acknowledging that he, too, had faced a similar challenge during his initial hero days. Initially, he had let the hero title get to his head, only to be humbled by a monstrous adversary, and this experience is what pushed him to become a stronger hero. As Cage waited, he observed Shin trembling in fear. However, he chose not to intervene, seeing it as a necessary step for Shin to advance to the next level as a hero. However, when the monster poised to strike Shin down and Cage anticipated the Grandmaster's intervention, nothing transpired. To the shock of Tai and the surprise of Cage, Shin was crushed under the monster's arms, marking an unexpected turn of events. "It's time to start all over again," Cage declared. This time, instead of waiting for the commander, a delay that had led to Shin's inevitable demise previously, Cage took swift action. He rushed in, rescuing both Shin and Tia, carrying them away to a distant forest, far removed from the ongoing chaos. After they caught their breath, Cage briefed Shin on the situation, emphasizing that although they had escaped the monster, it continued to rampage freely in the kingdom, and given the current trajectory, the kingdom would inevitably fall, and its people would face destruction at the monster's hands. Cage criticized Shin, expressing that if only he had heeded to his advice earlier, he would have possessed the strength to protect the kingdom during these tumultuous times. With these words, Cage posed a question to Shin. "As the hero, what are you going to do?" In response, Shin looked downward, a grim expression of frustration etched on his face, recalling a troubled past of constantly being directed by others without having a say in the matter. Confronting Cage, Shin declared his refusal to follow the advice offered, and Cage, visibly annoyed, wondered what kind of hero a freelancer could become if they refused guidance. Shin questioned whether the freelance occupation was as overpowered as Cage had suggested, pointing out that his first attack on the monster was potent enough to bring it down, yet the subsequent attack seemed weaker for some reason. Caught in a challenging situation, Cage realized he had inadvertently trapped himself. However, an idea struck him, and he asked Shin about his feelings during the second attack. Shin responded that he felt terrified when the beast didn't go down in one blow. Seizing the opportunity, Cage, with a dubious smile, fabricated an explanation, claiming that a freelancer's weapon strength fluctuates based on their emotions. The stronger the will, the more powerful the attack, and vice versa. Shin appeared to accept this explanation, and Cage was initially excited that Shin had fallen for the ruse. However, this excitement turned to shock when Shin strengthened his resolve to face the monster, blindsiding Cage with the unexpected turn of events. This elicits a frustrated grimace from Cage, but his thoughts are abruptly interrupted by Tia, who approaches him expressing her willingness to heed Cage's advice as long as they can defeat the monster. Upon hearing this, Cage quickly chugged his liquid down her throat, before equipping her with cheat accessories. With these preparations completed, Cage produces a spellbook and encourages Tia to recite a spell, to which she complies without any hesitation. After uttering the incantation, she gazes upward, astonished to witness a massive meteorite descending from the sky, and on the other side of the forest, Shin watches in stunned silence. Cage, wearing an excited smile, declares, "Yeah, this is how you train newbies."